What is emotion regulation? And what can us parents do to help our children and ourselves make things a little easier? My name's Victoria Kettis. I'm a mom of two who have taught me so much about emotions and regulating and dysregulating them. And I'm a manager and facilitator here at Family Smart. To talk about this and answer all of our questions, I am joined by the lovely Nicole, and I'm going to let her tell you a bit about herself.
Thank you, Victoria. My name is Nicole Allen. I'm a registered clinical counselor in private practice. I'm a mother of three, ranging in ages from 16 to 27, so a little bit of lived experience there under my belt as well, and a co-parent on this amazing journey of parenting. I've worked with agencies, including child and youth mental health, as well as a Fraser Health organization called START, which is a crisis response program for youth. My role there was to work primarily with the families and caregivers, because when we have a youth in crisis, we also have a family that's in crisis. And it was through that work that I got to know all about Family Smart. And so I'm really happy to be here today and having this conversation. I don't know that I'm going to be able to answer all the questions, but I'm certainly going to give it a shot.
Great. Thank you for that. And what I love is that our questions are designed coming from families who are struggling. And when I think about all the things you've done and all the places you've been and the families you've supported, it's incredible to have your knowledge and experiences with us. So thank you. So when I hear the words emotion dysregulation, it takes me to that old saying, a parent is only as happy as their least happy child. So we aren't comfortable with our kids being uncomfortable. So what is emotion dysregulation, and why do we respond the way we do when our kids are expressing such big emotions?
Yeah, those are huge questions.
Yes.
You know, in a nutshell, emotion dysregulation happens when the skills that we need to cope with a given situation are exceeded by the situation, where there is a gap between what we need to be able to respond skillfully and what we're able to do. And this is where we have those moments of overwhelm, which can look quite different from child to child, and from family to family. So, and from situation to situation too. When we're looking at that as a skills deficit, that really allows us as the parents and caregivers to be able to step back, and because a lot of fears start to flood in for us when this is happening, and we can assign a lot of meaning. Sometimes that meaning isn't quite accurate, like they're being a bad kid, or they're being manipulative, or attention seeking. Like, these are phrases sometimes that, because parents themselves heard those phrases maybe growing up, or because sometimes the behavior seems a little calculated maybe, or at the most inconvenient times. Sometimes those are the narratives that it's really easy to have those slip in there. And when we're instead looking at it from, there's a skills gap, something has really overwhelmed the child, or they're just not able to be their best selves in this moment, that can really help us to kind of take a step back and recognize, why am I assigning this meaning? Why am I assigning this narrative to what's going on? Can help us kind of take a step back and take a breath as well and say, oh, just wait a minute. This is an indication of we don't have the skills we need to be able to manage this situation as our best selves. When we can look at what's happening for our child through that lens, that really helps us to go, oh, okay, well, I can coach that. I can come alongside that. I can, figure out what to do there. It really changes ourselves becoming emotionally dysregulated when we can step in and see it through that lens. So really just understanding it as there's a skills gap here that we're seeing.
Great. And that's wonderful, because we can then have something that we can build on, that we can look towards creating. What are some of those things that we can do to help our children manage that dysregulation when they are missing those skills to be able to do that?
Yeah. And again, a lot of the focus that I do is working with the parents and caregivers, because such a big part of it, the biggest skill that we can bring to the table, is knowing how we are activated in that moment, because that's really going to shape how we're going to be able to step into being able to respond effectively, or whether we're going to be coming at it through a lens of our own activation. that's the thing with emotion dysregulation, is when we're dysregulated, we're often not aware that we're dysregulated. And so we're not the best indicators of whether we're regulated or dysregulated. But we can recognize it in other people really, really quickly. So quite often when I talk to parents, they'll say, I was really calm. But when you talk to the young person, they're like, oh, mom was angry. I could tell she was angry. Or, dad was irritated. Or, they're seeing something quite different. And we have to kind of have that lens to be able to say, okay, wait a minute, what is flooding in here really quickly? And usually what's flooding in when our young ones are quite dysregulated is a lot of fear. And I call this, when I'm working with families, I call it the F word. Um, and a lot of parents will say, no, I wasn't afraid. Like that, I'm not feeling fear. And that's true, because they in that moment, what they're experiencing is maybe anger or frustration or stress. And those are the things that they can identify really, really quickly and easily. But fear is underneath all of that. And that fear is really a driving narrative that says, I've lost control. I don't know what to do. People are looking. Why are they so upset? I'm confused that my child is so upset. It doesn't make any sense. What does this mean? And so when we're talking about that fear that really gets underneath, that's a narrative that comes flooding in for us. And it's like drinking out of a fire hose once that starts to happen. It's very, very hard. And then we're flooded, right? We are overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. We are dysregulated. Even if we're able to kind of perform calmness in that moment and keep our voices calm and low, we're quite flooded and overwhelmed. And so biggest thing that parents can do right off the get-go is really, take that deep breath and just recognize, oh, your distress makes me feel anxious and uncomfortable and maybe afraid, because it feels like I've lost control. And that activates the anger and the irritation and all of those things. So if I can just acknowledge that there's a lot of things I'm telling myself about this situation, as soon as my young one starts to become distressed, and move that off to the side, I can deal with that later. Let me just be in this moment with this child. Why that's so important to do is because a dysregulated parent can never regulate a dysregulated child. And a dysregulated parent will dysregulate a regulated child. So how we approach that situation, how we're able to manage ourselves and the energy that we're bringing into that, is really the first, biggest, most important step in being able to support our young one, and being able to recognize what those fears are that come up for us and move them off to the side so that we can just be connecting with this child in this situation, in this moment. That can really start to lower the energy that we're coming into it with.
That's a really empowering statement. I think about it that we have the ability, if we can calm ourselves in a moment, to be a calming force in our child. But if we can't calm ourselves, there's no calming that child. So a great opportunity for us, as you said earlier, to be able to pause and step back and question where we're coming from, so that we can model how we'd like them to come from. Thank you for that.
And I really encourage parents to be really gentle with themselves around this too. Those narratives that we have, they don't come from nowhere. And when we get activated by them, often we're not aware. It happens like in faster than a blink of an eye, right? That those fears start to come up and we ourselves get activated. So that is a skill for us to work on as well, to recognize when something has kind of gotten under our skin a little bit. Mm-hmm. That's such an important skill for parents.
Yes, thank you for that. So we're taught to be proactive as parents and to solve problems before they happen, so that we can keep things as calm as we'd like them to be. But I'm wondering, can we predict when dysregulation will occur with our kids?
A lot of the time, yes, if we sort of understand what we're looking at when we're seeing moments of dysregulation. And again, I'm really coming at this from a lens of where there's a pattern of behavior. And I want to make an important distinction, which is kids get upset. Kids get frustrated, they get angry. We all have bad days. And so first of all, to invite parents and caregivers to kind of just ask that question, like, with a lot of self-compassion and a lot of empathy, what is our tolerance for when our child is having a bad day or when they're upset? This is not the same thing as sort of ongoing chronic emotion dysregulation, which is something that's happening every single day, um, can get quite escalated, is really disorienting or distressing for the whole family. Sometimes parents don't have a lot of tolerance or a lot of, um, they get quite uncomfortable when their child is upset or overwhelmed or they have, a bit of a meltdown or something. But a lot of that is to be expected, in those childhood and adolescent developmental stages. So really have that question, first of all, is my child just having a bad day, or is this sort of an ongoing problem that we need to have a lot more, skills around and a lot more support around? So having said that, a lot of emotion dysregulation seems to come out of the blue. And so this is where it's really important to almost become a bit of a cartographer, as a parent and caregiver. And let's start to piece it together. Does it tend to happen at a certain time of day? Does it tend to happen, that half hour before supper time, which, can really be, a challenging time in a lot of households? Does it tend to happen closer to the end of the week or on Sunday evenings as they're starting to anticipate going to school the next day? We can start to kind of map it a little bit, because a lot of parents will say that, these moments of dysregulation really come out of the blue. We were having such a great day, and then this thing happened, and it's confusing. So if we can just kind of add a little bit of focus to the lens that we're using, that can really start to flesh out some of those times a little bit more. So some of those skills are recognizing that transitions can be really challenging for kids. And that's not just transitions between activities, although often it is that, right? Between something that's really fun and something that's less fun, from maybe playing a video game to now it's bath time, or now it's time to get ready for bed, or transitions from leaving the home to going to school. Or, another big transition for a lot of young ones is if they're going between homes where you have a co-parenting situation, whether week on, week off, or day to day, or whatever that looks like. These are big transitions, and a lot of kids need a lot of support around those transitions. But other things that can kind of, it's not like one big thing, it can be a bunch of little things. Some of those are on a biological basis. Are they feeling tired or hungry, or are they dehydrated? Are they feeling sick, coming down with a cold, or just getting over something? Do they experience chronic pain, or is there an injury or something like that that might be affecting them? Has there been a brain injury that might make connecting and regulating emotions really challenging? These are all like little things. No one of those things might be what leads to dysregulation, but as they stack up, these things might be contributing factors. Other factors might be on an emotional basis. Are they stressed? This is the Sunday afternoon, right, as they start looking into their school or anticipating transitioning between homes for co-parenting situations. Or, is there conflict with friends going on? Are they depressed? Do they experience anxiety? Are they scared or nervous or lonely or worried, or any of those things on an emotion, or all of those things, right, on an emotional basis? Other concerns might be environmental, right? Is there a lot of conflict or stress in the home? Is there a lot of stress or uncertainty around, maybe moving, or, what does that home environment look like? Are there financial stresses that parents and caregivers are worried about? All of these things we might not be able to do much about, but they're all just sort of understanding how these things kind of can stack up for young ones. And also looking at that on the social lens. A lot of young ones really struggle coming into or going back to school after holidays or breaks. So we can see a lot of escalations in behavior, through June as they start anticipating, those summer months, which for a lot of us, we would say, oh, 2 months off, like, isn't that great? But for a lot of young ones, just having a change in routine or a change in structure, not really being sure what to anticipate, on a day-to-day basis, this can feel stressful. And the important thing is to understand that every young person is going to deal with any or all of those stressors quite differently. So you might have, a family of, say, 4 kids, and where you've got 3 of them, and they just roll with these things, no problem. And then you've got that other child that really struggles with these changes or these stresses. One of the ways to look at it is I talk about like a cup metaphor. And so if we think about having a cup, this is not a half empty, half full scenario. But if we think about having a cup, and that cup represents our capacity to cope with stuff. When we're quite little, toddlers and those 2s and 3s and 4s, our capacity to cope, we just have little cups, right? Like shot glass size cups. And what happens is we get really easily overwhelmed. We have these meltdowns, we have tantrums, sometimes like 10 or 15 times a day, right? Where we cry or stomp our feet or we get really overwhelmed. As we get older, generally speaking, our cups get bigger, but not everybody's cup is the same size. And not everybody, we can't assume that we know what the size of everyone's cups are. Those cups get filled as we go through our days, as we go through our weeks, with all of those stressors that we were just talking about, those biological and social and environmental and psychological stressors that happen. And what happens is when we see that overwhelm, when we see that emotion dysregulation happening, it's just an indication that one last thing, one last drop in that cup has caused it to overflow. Now, we tend to really focus on what that one last drop was and say, it doesn't make sense that you're so upset about this thing. It's such a silly little thing. You can't find your headset, or, your game didn't save properly, or, I don't know, often it's something ridiculously small that if we're standing here looking at that, it just doesn't make sense to us. But this is where that skill of attunement really comes in, where we want to say, I can't look at it through my lens of what makes sense, because my cup capacity is usually quite a bit larger than my young person's. And that thing, even with all the other things going on, wouldn't have overwhelmed me in quite that same way. When we're looking at it through the lens of attunement, we want to be asking ourselves the question, what does this child need in this moment? Because what I'm looking at indicates to me, clear as the nose on my face, that their capacity has been overshot. And if I focus too much on that one thing that, sort of broke the surface tension and overflowed their cup, I'm focusing on the wrong thing. I'm over-focusing on the wrong thing. What I need to be doing instead is just very matter-of-factly observing that, okay, their cup has been overshot, their capacity has been maxed out, and now we really need to work on bringing down the fullness of their cup. This is why young people might seem more fragile even when this situation gets resolved. Maybe it takes very little, an hour from now, 2 hours from now, for them to have another moment of really intense dysregulation. It's because that surface area of the cup is still quite high. So how do we bring that down? How do we do that? This is really about inviting them to notice their own cups in that way.
I wish I could go back in time. I think of all the times that I was less compassionate, less empathetic than I would have liked to have been with my child, because we never did make sense. And I imagine many of the families watching can relate to that. Nothing about their meltdown, as you expressed, or their explosiveness made sense to anything that was going on. So that's what we did focus on, because that's what we saw and that's what we understood. Now we have this knowing now, everyone watching, and being able to think about our child's cup. And I think as we were doing this along the way before today, we were comparing them to other kids and other siblings maybe, and not recognizing their cup. So now that we have this knowledge to be able to look at our child through a different clean glass lens, to understand that this buildup happens, all these different factors come along in a day, we can see that. Now our child doesn't. So how can we coach them to see how all of these things build up for them, and how they might be able to look at it differently themselves and become aware of their cup?
Yeah. That's such a beautiful question, because I think in the work that I've done with families before, and then you talk to the young person, and then you talk to the parents and caregivers, um, parents often believe that they are modeling. We don't have meltdowns like that. We don't yell at each other. We don't, we're not modeling that behavior. And when you talk to the young person, quite often they will say, Mom or Dad, don't get upset like this. Grandma and Grandpa, they don't feel angry like I feel. And we're missing an opportunity to model. And that's because parents and caregivers actually have good emotion regulation skills. But what the young person is seeing is they're just seeing the end result. And it looks effortless. It looks like it's easy. And so what they tell themselves is, the adults in my world just don't feel things the way I feel things. We're missing an opportunity to be really explicit and use our words and model. How do I get here every day? How do I do this as part of an ongoing strategy? So one way that we can do that as parents and caregivers, and invite our young people to start noticing, yeah, emotion dysregulation isn't something we roll out when we're in a moment of crisis. It's actually something we practice all day long, every day. So if we were to say something like, you know what, yeah, today I knew I had that big meeting and I was feeling really stressed about it. So you know what I did? I made sure that 15 minutes beforehand I went outside, I had a walk, I had some water, I had a snack, because, I get hangry. And then I did, 5 deep breaths or whatever. And you know what? When I went into that meeting, I felt really a lot calmer and a lot more grounded. And it was a tough meeting, but you know what? I felt pretty good about it. When we use our words just matter of factly to walk through, we're just sharing part of our day, but we're walking them through, hey, I knew this might be a problem. And so these are the steps I took because I know that's what I need. And it helped. And instead of just saying, oh, you know what, I went into that meeting and I rocked it, even though I knew it was going to be difficult, that's a really different story. And we're missing the opportunity to model a lot of steps there for our young person, and to make it a very normal part of our family communication, how we preventatively sort of check in with ourselves and see, how are we doing? How can I set myself up for success going forward to increase the likelihood that I'm going to be able to, keep it together and be my best self, or the best version of my best self that I can be today, right? Which might change day to day. When we're not using our words, our young people think there's nothing happening, that it's effortless for us. This is a tremendous opportunity to build a sense of connection, and to allow our young people to feel not alone in what's going on for them. It's a revelation to young people that, you know what, mom gets really angry sometimes too, and that's something I've got to actively manage. I haven't always been successful at actively managing that, but I know that I need to, because that's how I want to show up in the world. It's a revelation to young people that dad gets scared, right? Or that dad worries about things, and how does he manage that? What are the strategies he uses, right? Golfing isn't just about getting out of the house and, whatever. Golfing is very meditative and relaxing. Connecting with friends is a really positive thing. When we can put those pieces together quite explicitly using our words for our young people, they see that emotion regulation isn't something that you do just in that crisis. It is the work and the fabric of a lifetime. It is how we manage ourselves all the time. We're using those skills, sometimes with better success than others, but this is what it looks like. It doesn't look like something that some people have to do and other people don't do. We're all doing it all of the time. So yeah, that's the biggest thing that we can teach our children, is that we do it all the time. This is how we do it. You will find ways that will work for you as well. But here are my ways. You can borrow them and try them, and let's figure this out together for you, because it's something that we all do.
Beautiful. Yes, we spend so much time protecting them from all of the things that we might see as uncomfortable. So it's a great way to model for them that they are so natural and they're there all the time.
Yeah.
Looking back
Can I just
on
jump
how,
in? Sorry,
oh,
Victoria, because
sure,
there was just
yeah.
one thing that I forgot to mention there was when we are wanting to invite our young people to recognize what's the capacity in their cup and where are they at, and also that these emotion regulation skills are something they do all the time, we want to do that in a really non-critical, matter-of-fact way. Just invite them to notice. Like, for example, a lot of young people get quite stressed or really emotional, more likely to an outburst or a meltdown later in the evening. And in a really non-critical way, we might mention to them, you know what, I notice later in the evening, get a little more emotional or I get a little upset. Sometimes it's hard to talk about things. Sometimes I worry more about things. Do you notice that for yourself too? Like maybe after 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, in my household it's 8 o'clock, that after that some conversations are difficult or there's like the feels are bigger then. Do you notice that? What we're doing is we're inviting them to notice this about themselves. So it's a bit of information for them going forward. We have to do this in a really non-critical, non-judgmental way that invites just observation rather than, self-criticism or, oh, I suck after 8 o'clock at night. I just can't do it. I can't talk about anything or, something like that. Just a piece of information like, yeah, it's harder to talk about things. My body might need rest at that time of day. My body might need food or hydration or whatever it needs. When we can frame it in that really kind of non-critical, non-judgmental, non-shaming language, like what does your body need? We're kind of taking it away from that narrative of, well, I just can't do it, or, flooding in a lot of those self-blaming or less compassionate narratives around why certain times can be harder for us. And we can really just invite them to be matter of fact. Like, it's kind of like, oh, my bike tire needs air. We're matter of fact about that. We don't feel necessarily anything about it. If we can say, my body needs rest after 8 o'clock at night, my body needs water, my body needs to relax, we really take that judgment out of it. And it's just pieces of information for us to know about ourselves. So thank you for letting me share that part too.
No, that's important. Thank you. So looking back on how I parented and listening to other parents along the way, we spend a lot of time trying to control situations before they come out of control. But we also worry and focus on things that we can't change. We're doing this in our attempts to make things easier for ourselves and for our kids, recognizing that it's not always helpful. Really briefly, I'm wondering if you can share, where do we have control?
Yeah, control is such a big word, right? That's so I just there's a phrase that I think of when it comes to control, and that's a bird sitting on a tree is never afraid of the branch breaking because its trust is not on the branch but on its own wings. That's a quote from Charlie Wardell. And when we think about that image, a lot of the times when we have the desire to have control, what we're trying to do is soothe our own worry or sense of anxiety, right? We want to line things up so that we know what's going to come next. We're trying to regulate ourselves by having control over our environment, which is great when we're just maybe talking about ourselves. But as soon as we have a young one in the mix, we really don't have a lot of control. We might have a little influence, but we don't have a lot of control. And so really, really recognizing, empowering ourselves with information, with some strategies, with some resources, really allow us to shift that lens from needing to know what's going to happen and have control over the situation to really back up and say, you know what, whatever the situation is, I am going to have some strategies that I can try. I'm going to have some things that I can do. So really, there's a few specific skills here. And one of those is have a plan. Every time you walk into a building, there's a fire safety, exit strategy. We don't feel anything about that in particular. It's just information, right? The same thing is at home. You know what? When I feel really stressed and really pressured, my plan is to give myself permission to take a step back and take a moment for myself. I can go for a walk around the block if I need to, or just give myself a moment, hide out in the bathroom for 3 minutes and just do some deep breathing for a minute, just so that I can get really grounded first before I have to kind of step in and deal with whatever it is that's going on. We don't always have the luxury to do that, but when it's a discussion, when there's something going on, when we're feeling pressure, just to know the first part in my plan is to plant my feet really firmly on the ground. Whew, this gives me some breathing room, right off the get-go. And then modeling tell our young person what that plan is. You know what, the next time that you're, really insisting that you need a ride somewhere, you know what, I'm going to need at least an hour's lead time. And I might say no. If you hound me about it, it's going to be a no. Because I don't want to feel pressured into that. But if you give me a minute to think about it and figure out how I can line that up in my day, then the likelihood that the answer is going to be yes is greater, not a guarantee, but this is how we're going to do it from now on, right? If we can roll out what that plan is, if we can anticipate there are certain things where I need a minute, you need a minute, we're going to do this a little bit differently, then everybody knows what the expectations are. Everybody knows what the plan is, right? And we can get matter of fact about that rather than in the intensity of the moment. Tensions are high, stress is high, everybody's feeling stressed, emotions are really likely to get overwhelmed. So if we can kind of get ahead of it, and then afterwards, when we've blown it, because we blow it, right? It's not just our young people. Yeah, it's not just our young people who become dysregulated. We hit our limits too. Knowing that we can always circle back and say, you know what, I think neither of us was our best selves there. Can we try that again? Or what you're doing is you're demonstrating that relationships are not a one and done. We don't only have one opportunity, and if we blow it, we're done. It's constantly negotiated, constantly navigated, and that we want to be showing up as our best selves for each other. So we're really modeling that self-compassion and how to make a good repair, how to make a good apology, circle back around, give yourself permission to have another run at it. I could probably go on for like another hour about that, but maybe let's just leave that there for now.
So when connection before correction, it's a statement we often hear around emotion regulation, happens, it can be challenging. So how do we find ways to build that relationship with our kids when things can be hard? And what are some of the skills or strategies we can try today or tomorrow as we step out of this conversation?
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of parents describe that feeling of walking on eggshells when they have a young person who becomes really dysregulated, maybe easily. Their cups are not very big, right? They're easily overwhelmed. And so there's sort of two parts to this. And the one is, in my mind, this is the phrase I use. I'm not drawing this from anywhere, but I get my head right. I put my feet on the ground and I really sort of really ground myself. And this is really being strategic. And one part of that is having that lens or that framework about how am I going to engage here. And one of those is I need to also be seeing the fullness of who this young person is and not just the problem, right? Not just the dysregulation. I need to have as much focus, equal focus on all of the wonderful parts of who this child is and not just assume that they know that, but really shine the light on that. So find opportunities to talk about how funny they are or how creative they are, what a good artist they are, what a good friend they are, or how curious they are, or what a good dresser they are, or any of these things, right? We have to find those things because otherwise what happens is when we're only commenting on, or when they're getting the biggest reaction, the most, 95% of the focus is on the dysregulation. That's the narrative they build about themselves because identity for young people is initially formed as a mirror of what their parents reflect back to them. This is what I see about you. And so if they're getting those messages all the time that focus on the dysregulation, that's how they start to see themselves. I'm too much. I'm a problem. I'm a bad kid. I'm not good, or things like that. So we want to make sure that how we're positioning ourselves is before we jump in there to correct something, have I kind of shined a light and flooded a light on some of the other things that are really excellent about my child today as well. Another part of focusing that lens is really having a strategic or a softened startup. If I come at it really in a critical way, in a I can't believe you're doing this again kind of approach, that's not likely to be heard or to be responded to well. But if I come at it with something that I call using company manners, right? The way I would speak to a guest or the way I would speak to a coworker with kind of my adult self and benefit of the doubt and, I need to be pleasant here no matter what I'm really feeling, then I'm modeling something quite different. And another part of getting my lens right is about coming at it knowing that I need to practice that skill of attunement, right? What does this child need in this moment? Mm-hmm. Really prioritizing the relationship over the situation. We are parents for a long time after childhood and adolescence, and I always come at it from that long view. When my child's 30 years old, how are they going to describe what it was like having me as a parent when they were younger? That doesn't mean I always need to be pleasing to them, right? Or that they always have to be happy, but that means do they feel loved and supported and seen and valued in this moment? So that's part of kind of getting yourself grounded, how you're going to enter into it. But the other part is some really key strategies. Be really explicit and use your words in how you model your own emotion regulation. And we've talked about that. Company manners we just talked about, which is a real skill that when we have to, we can do that like putting on a hat. It's really quick. It's like, okay, hang on. If I was going to talk to you like you were a guest visiting our home, I'd be much more mindful of my tone. I would take a breath. See how automatic that is? We take that breath, right? It's like, yes. Oh, I need to right? It's that quickly. I'm going to be company manners. Another one is really reinforce or positively reframe any attempt that they make to self-regulate. So an example of this might be when they say, I'm sick of you all, and they stomp off to their room and slam the door. When we go and are able to connect with them about that, we might say, you know what I saw you do there? I saw you leave a situation when you felt overwhelmed, and good for you. You know what? That was good. I'm not going to focus on the slamming of the door. I'm not going to focus on what they said ahead of time. I'm going to focus on and highlight what did you do right there. That increases the likelihood that next time they're just going to go, you know what? I just need a minute, and they're going to leave and they're going to go to their room because that's a positive thing that they tried to do there. So really reinforce and reframe for them the good that they're trying to do to self-regulate, because they might not have seen it that way at all, right? But they can. This is a skill. Another one that I really like is called a 10-minute curiosity burst. Often where young people are really interested in things that we are not interested in at all. And we can find that really boring, whether that's anime or, they can fixate on all kinds of different things, right? That we kind of think, or gaming, or, I don't know, you name it, right? That you're not really into. And if you give yourself permission, 10 minutes, start with 1 minute if 10 minutes feels too much, and just ask questions. The lens I use is something called first date thinking, where remember when you're on a first date with someone and you're like, they're endlessly interesting. Everything about them is interesting. And you're asking so many questions and you're just learning so much about them. There's no judgment in that space. So when we can do that with our young people, you know what? You seem to really be watching a lot of this anime show lately. What's this all about? How did you learn about it? Who introduced you to it? Do your friends watch this too? What do you like about it? Do you like the art, or do you like the character development, or do you watch other things too that are kind of similar to this? Do you know anything about the artist? I'm endlessly curious for about 10 minutes, and I'm not getting into so much a conversation about it. I'm inviting them to share. I'm not responding in any way other than to say, oh, isn't that interesting? Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, you must really know a lot about this. But I have no judgment like, well, that's stupid. Or we used to read Scooby-Doo. Or we used to, I'm not sharing with them what I think about or extending it or anything. I'm just allowing them to share with me, and I'm eating it up. I'm loving that they're sharing their passion with me. And then afterwards, I just say, you know what? That was really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. And we go away. And what happens is when we do that, they learn that mom or dad or grandma or grandpa or auntie or uncle or whoever is in the parent role in this child's life, they're interested in me. they see this part of me and they love it. They're curious, they're engaging. That's going to increase the likelihood that they're going to want to share more with us going forward. And we also talked about that skill as well, of that front load them with what the plan is, right? Like that safety, the fire safety, front load them with what they're going to be able to predict from you. And also maybe the expectation of what you're expecting to see, and then circle back, repair. We're creating predictability and in what our response is going to be, because that's the only thing we have control over. And we're inviting them to notice that's the skill. It's not in lining things up in front of you so that you have a sense of control. It's in knowing that I can be in control, because I can kind of take that on for myself. That's emotion regulation, is when we know that we can have control over ourselves.
Nicole, you've given us so much to think about, and I love that the control is in our own self, emotion regulation. Thank you for that. I want to thank you for your time, for your wisdom, for your experiences and stories to help bring all this to life. I want to thank our funders and partners who come alongside us to do this great work. And I want to thank you for joining us today to be able to be in this conversation, to continue to learn for your kids. On behalf of them, I thank you. And I wish you so much compassion and kindness to yourself as you find your way and forgive yourselves and repair with yourself those times when you weren't able to. Take care. Be well, everyone.